Picture this. You wake up one morning feeling a little off. Maybe you slept weird. Maybe you ate something bad. You figure you'll feel better by noon. By noon, you have a fever so bad your skin feels like it's on fire. By sunset, you notice something growing in your armpit. And by the time the sun rises again, your neighbor is paying someone to drag your body into the street. That was Tuesday in Europe in 1347. Let's set the scene because most people have no idea how fast this thing actually moved. In October of 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. And when port officials went to greet the sailors, most of them were already dead. The ones who weren't dead were covered in black, oozing boils the size of eggs that oozed blood and pus and smelled so bad that people standing nearby would vomit just from the smell. The port officials did what any reasonable person would do. They immediately ordered every single ship out of the harbor. Too late. Within 2 years, the Black Death had swept across the entirety of Europe and killed somewhere between 30 to 60% of the entire population. In some cities, it was closer to 80%. Let that number sit for a second. But here's what the history books skip over. What actually happened to the people who didn't die? Because surviving the Black Death wasn't exactly a win. In a lot of ways, it was its own kind of punishment. First, let's talk about what this thing actually was, because calling it a plague makes it sound a lot cleaner than it was. The Black Death was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which lived in the fleas that lived on rats. And medieval Europe was absolutely drowning in rats. When an infected flea bit you, the bacteria entered your bloodstream and immediately started attacking your lymph nodes, the small glands scattered around your body that are part of your immune system. Within 24 to 48 hours, those lymph nodes would begin to swell violently, forming what doctors at the time called buboes, which is where we get the name bubonic plague. These buboes would appear in your armpits, your groin, and the side of your neck. And they weren't small. They could grow to the size of an apple. They were rock hard, scorching hot to the touch, and caused pain so severe that survivors described it as feeling like being stabbed repeatedly from the inside. Then came the fever. Then the chills. Then the vomiting. Then your skin started going dark. The blackening of the skin was caused by subdermal hemorrhaging, basically internal bleeding spreading underneath your skin. Fingers went black. Toes went black. In severe cases, entire limbs went black and began to die while the person was still alive. If the infection reached your lungs, which it could, you would start coughing up blood. At that stage, every single breath you exhaled was now contagious, which is how the pneumonic version of the plague spread person to person through the air. From the first symptom to death was typically 3 to 5 days. Sometimes less. Now here's where it gets darkly funny. Because medieval doctors, God bless them, had absolutely no idea what was happening. And their solutions were impressively, spectacularly wrong. The leading medical theory of the time was that the plague was caused by bad air, called miasma, that floated around and entered your body through your pores. Their solution? Smell something worse. Doctors genuinely recommended that people hold foul-smelling objects near their faces to cancel out the bad air. We're talking goat urine, feces, and rotting plants. Some people were advised to sit in sewers. Literal sewers. For hours. As medicine. Others were told to sit between 2 large fires to purify the air around them, in the middle of summer, while already running a 104-degree fever. The plague doctors who actually went out to treat patients became one of the most iconic images in history. They wore long leather robes, gloves, a wide-brimmed hat, and that famous beaked mask. The beak was stuffed with flowers, herbs, and spices, again, to fight the miasma. Accidentally, the leather suit and gloves actually did provide some flea protection. But the beak? Completely useless. Most plague doctors died anyway. For patients who were still alive, doctors would attempt to lance the buboes, cut them open, to drain the fluid. This was one of the few treatments that actually did provide some relief. But performing this in a room with no antiseptics, no sterile tools, and no understanding of infection was basically just adding a second problem on top of the first one. Here is where it gets truly bleak. Society didn't just slow down during the Black Death. It collapsed. Completely. Farmers abandoned their fields. Livestock wandered the countryside with nobody to tend them. Bakers stopped baking. Priests stopped giving last rites because there were too many dying people and not enough priests, and also because a huge percentage of the priests were dying too. In cities like Florence and Paris, the streets became impassable not because of traffic, but because of bodies. People would simply die in the streets and nobody would come to collect them. Corpses piled up outside homes, in alleys, in churchyards. The French city of Avignon had such an overflow of bodies that the Pope, who lived there at the time, actually consecrated the Rhone River so that bodies could legally be thrown into it, since the cemeteries were full. Just imagine. Your city's drinking water supply is now officially also your cemetery. One of the most disturbing documented behaviors was what happened to families. When someone in your household showed the first symptoms, the fear was so total and so rational that family members would sometimes flee immediately, abandoning their sick husband, wife, or child, because they knew that staying meant death. A 14th-century writer named Giovanni Boccaccio recorded that fathers abandoned sons, wives abandoned husbands, and brothers abandoned each other. Children were the most vulnerable. Orphans wandered cities by the thousands, with no parents, no food, and no one to take them in because nobody wanted to get close to a child who might be infected. So let's say you made it. You woke up on day 6 and the fever broke. The buboes began to shrink. You were still alive. Here is what you came back to. Your town had lost half its people, at minimum. Your neighbors were dead. Your priest was dead. Your doctor was dead. The market was closed. The baker was dead. The fields outside town were full of unharvested crops rotting in the ground because the farmers who planted them were dead. Many survivors found that their homes had been looted while they were bedridden. Because looters had learned that if you waited for someone to get sick, you just had to wait a few days and their house was yours. The psychological damage was total. Survivors of the Black Death showed what we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress. Many people simply stopped following laws, stopped going to church, stopped caring about the future entirely, because they had watched the future get erased in real time. But there's one final twist to all of this that historians find genuinely remarkable. Some people survived because of a genetic mutation. A small percentage of Europeans carry a mutation in a gene called CCR5 which made them significantly more resistant to the plague bacterium. Scientists today believe that the Black Death was so devastating and so widespread that it actually changed European DNA, wiping out people without the mutation and leaving behind a higher concentration of people who had it. Which means if you are of European descent, there is a very real chance that one of your distant ancestors survived the worst pandemic in recorded human history, not because they were smarter, not because they were richer, not because their doctor sat them in a sewer, but because of a single tiny genetic accident. The Black Death didn't just kill half of Europe. It quietly decided who the rest of us would be. And that's what it was actually like to survive the Black Death. Not a triumph. Not a miracle. Just a slow walk back through the ruins of everything you knew, with the very real possibility that the flea on the rat in your kitchen wall was about to start the whole thing over again. Which, for many people, it did.